Hello, my question is, how can you still be your own source of happiness while trying to find a partner?
What are some ways I can practice self-love while being in a relationship?
What would you say to someone who is struggling with constantly comparing themselves to other people?
Hello, and welcome to Engineering Love. I'm Kim Pullender, and I help you engineer a stronger relationship by troubleshooting conflict and communication. Today, we're talking about self-esteem, a sense of self, finding your identity, perhaps, and some of the challenges that go along with it, maybe impostor syndrome or something similar. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term impostor syndrome, it refers to this feeling that you feel like a fraud. You may be highly successful in business or athletics, but inside, you feel like you don't deserve it, you feel like you're not qualified, and that it's only a matter of time before you're exposed for being an imposter. Now, imposter syndrome is not an official part of the DSM, and the DSM is basically the main book that the American Psychiatric Association uses to diagnose mental disorders. It's a huge manual that includes criteria and descriptions for over 300 mental disorders. So it covers everything from bipolar to anxiety to personality disorders, psychotic disorders. And the criteria is very specific. So it's almost down to a science where they have standards laid out in specifics where someone needs to satisfy a certain set of criteria in order to qualify for a diagnosis. So it's important to note that imposter syndrome is actually not an official part of the DSM, but it became very popular in pop culture, and it kind of caught on as a phrase. When we break down what imposter syndrome is, which is basically that feeling of doubting your own abilities, where the only reason you've been successful in life is due to maybe luck or being in the right place at the right time, or maybe someone gave you that position, that job. And it will lead to this feeling that you just don't belong, you're always on the outside, that you're really not qualified or competent. And the biggest fear is that you will eventually be exposed as a fraud. As you can imagine, imposter syndrome has a huge impact on a person's self-esteem. So when we deconstruct and break down what imposter syndrome is, it basically boils down to low self-esteem. You'll notice that all of the questions today kind of follow the same theme of questioning your sense of self, your self-esteem, how to take care of yourself with self-care, self-love, and what happens when that inner dialogue gets going and you start comparing yourself to others constantly. I think all of these questions are very relatable. All of us have thought these things at some point in time, and today I'm hoping to just offer some different perspectives to help you on your journey. When it comes to a sense of self, our self-esteem gets seeded very young in life, where our family members weigh in. We're constantly getting feedback on who we are, how well we're doing, how poorly we're doing, if we are able to do that thing better, or if we're just a failure and will never amount to anything. Many times, people who struggle with this sense of self, this lack of identity, find themselves being maybe people pleasers in life. People who avoid conflict at all costs. I'm sure people-pleasing will be a recurring theme, something that will come up again in future episodes, but for today I'll just touch on it a little bit. At first glance, people-pleasing seems like a noble thing to do, a fine gesture. But when we dig deeper into people-pleasing and where it drives from and what fuels it, it comes down to, unfortunately, a little manipulation. Or a lot of manipulation, where people pleasers view love as very formulaic, meaning, if I do this for you, you will love me. If I take care of that for you, you will not reject me. If I avoid conflict and confrontation and just go along with what you're saying, then you will think more highly of me. You will accept me. Ultimately, people pleasing is manipulating other people in that you are only doing things in order to get a certain response from them, in order to elicit a certain feeling from them. Now, I don't mean manipulation from a malicious point of view. But it is manipulative when you look at the fact that you do this thing to please the other person in hopes that they accept you more and like you more. And if they don't accept and like you more, then they're not following the formula. This can lead to resentment, bitterness, low self-esteem, and even depression. I'll touch more on people-pleasing when we start to get into the questions, but I wanted to give a little introduction for now. Along with people-pleasing comes the avoidance of conflict. Again, at the surface, avoiding conflict seems like a nice thing to do. You're not starting fights. You're not causing drama. However, consistently avoiding conflict can, over the course of a lifetime, lead to a lot of destruction. Let's say a person avoids conflict at all costs. Now, when this person starts hanging out with a friend who just happens to gossip or trash talk another friend, this conflict avoider will not defend the other person. The conflict avoider will just go along with what's being said. Now the conflict avoider is starting into a pattern of going with the flow, where they end up losing a lot of integrity because they're now trash talking people behind their back. And if that person gets a reputation for that, then they're looked upon as not being trustworthy. They start to lose intimacy, emotional intimacy in friendships. Now let's follow this conflict avoider into marriage, where they don't want to speak up for their needs. They don't want to express their needs. They fall into those people-pleasing patterns. And now 10 years into the marriage, they wake up one morning and they don't know who they are. They're going through the motions in their marriage and in parenting, feeling hopeless, feeling lost, and a lot of resentment has built up. These are the people that I talk to frequently in relationship coaching. So now you have a person who doesn't really have integrity when it comes to friendships, is just going to kind of go with the flow. You get them into a marriage, and now they're going with the flow of their partner, of their children, losing their identity. That bitterness and resentment has grown. And now let's follow this conflict avoider into a community. So it's now a larger scale, where let's say the family is introduced to an investor or a business person who, for whatever reason, has a shady vibe, but the conflict avoider doesn't want to call them out on it, doesn't want to confront them about it. As you can see, one could really run with this scenario and see how avoiding conflict can lead to actually a lot of danger, financial instability, and or physical harm to a family. Now, you may think that I'm really exaggerating right now and I'm being a little over dramatic, but if you are a conflict avoider, you can look back on your life and see some resonance with what I'm saying. And now let's follow that conflict avoider into a larger group, such as family, in-laws, extended family. And let's say that conflict avoider doesn't stand up for themselves when it comes to difficult family members, difficult in-laws. And again, just sucks it up for the sake of people-pleasing or for not making waves, not causing conflict. Check in with this person 10 years later, and they are going to be extremely bitter, extremely resentful, and extremely sad. If you are a conflict avoider, when you look back upon your life and the regrets that you have due to conflict avoidance and not learning skills earlier in life, we need to be taught these skills. It's not that you should have known how to communicate and confront and stand up for yourself just naturally. We have to learn these communication skills. But I think you can agree that when you look back upon your life, there are just so many regrets. Having a strong sense of self, a strong identity, knowing who you are, and being willing to stand up for who you are and your values, it will lead to so much more happiness, such better, healthier relationships, because you will naturally gravitate toward fellow people who have integrity, and you won't feel like the world has passed you by. And now let's move on to this week's questions.
Hello, my question is, how can you still be your own source of happiness while trying to find a partner? Because I really don't know how to do that for myself. Thank you.
What a great question. I also really appreciate your honesty and vulnerability in just not knowing how to do this for yourself. And there's absolutely no shame in that because someone didn't ever teach you. So often people get down on themselves for not having these skills of communication or conflict resolution or confrontation skills. and it's just that you've never been taught. So when it comes to being your own source of happiness, the first question I would want to know is, what makes you happy? This question comes up a lot in couples coaching, where it may not necessarily be phrased at what makes you happy, but I ask people, what do you need? What could your partner say or do that would help you, support you, essentially make you happier, help you feel resolved? And you'd be surprised at how many people give me this deer in the headlights look with the helpless feeling of, I don't know what they could do or say to make me feel better. And it's a very frustrating place to be. So I ask what makes you happy, but I have a feeling that you may not be tuned into that just yet. And one of the reasons that you may not know what makes you happy, or you may not know what you need from your partner, is because you've been so busy living your life being tuned into other people's needs and other people's happiness. Again, getting back to the framework of a people pleaser. So because your question wasn't very specific as to what sorts of things you were challenged with, I'll approach it from a very general point of view, kind of high level, of things you could explore to find your source of happiness. My first suggestion would be to find a community. Now, I don't mean go find some social justice cause and start marching on your local government office. What I mean by community is finding a group of people, a tribe, people you relate to, identify with, and become a part of something bigger. Research has proven this, that happiness is very much related to being involved in something bigger than yourself, a higher purpose, a sense of purpose. It may be family, raising a family. It could be the job that you do, the impact you're making on the community. It could be belonging to a church, doing some sort of missionary outreach. Or it could be that scenario of being involved in some sort of social justice cause. But finding a community is essential for feeling that there's some purpose to your life. Another suggestion is to start experimenting with what makes you happy. Trial and error. Go out there and sign up for an art class, sign up for a web design class, read different types of books from different types of genres. Start experimenting and doing these things where, while you're single, you don't have a partner who's also weighing in, where your opinion would then be swayed toward how they feel. Experiment while you're single and can form an opinion of your own where it's not going to be, in your mind, detrimental to the relationship, where there's not going to be a risk or fear of rejection or abandonment, where acceptance is not riding on the line of whether you enjoy this activity or not. And another suggestion I have is to look upon your own life. Look back on your history as kind of a database of your life. Somewhere in that history, you have the solution. What has made you happy in the past? You could also go about it the reverse way and find out what made you really unhappy in the past and do the opposite of that. When you go back into the past and find what worked for you, what made you happy, then look at what was going on at that point in your life and try to recreate it, because at that point, you have a template for success. You have your own template for happiness. Maybe you were exercising a lot. Maybe you were eating better, sleeping better. Maybe you had a great job. Maybe you felt good about your job, confident. Maybe you had great relations with your family. Whatever the case may be, find that point in your life where you were happy and deconstruct it. Now, a lot of people might say, well, during that time I was with a partner, the love of my life. Well, aside from that, what things were you doing with that partner? Somewhere in your life, there's going to be something that you did where it provided a lot of happiness. And that's a good clue of where you can start today. And the final suggestion I have is to find your own source of happiness. Focus on your platonic friendships. Platonic friendships are so underrated when it comes to the pursuit of love. There is so much depth and reward and richness that can come from platonic relationships. Best friends. People who have your back. People who, when the going gets rough, they will never leave your side. With friends, you can practice relationship skills of being vulnerable, being open, confrontation, conflict resolution, forgiveness. And in working on all of those, you can also get the benefits of working through those things. I experienced the deepest, most rewarding, and richest life and love with the best friends in my life. People rarely explore the full potential of deep, intimate, emotional love between you and your platonic friends. I can't tell you how many people come into couples coaching where each partner will say, yeah, we talk to each other, but when it comes to vulnerability or confrontation or conflict resolution with friends, they don't really go there with friends. They save all of that for their romantic relationship. Where what I'm arguing today is if you practice these skills of working through resentments, working through forgiveness, practicing empathy, if you get good at these skills with your platonic friends, your romantic relationships will go that much more smoothly. Because people jump into romantic relationships with very little practice at these skills, and then they expect to just be so good at it right off the bat. And that's not realistic. Where else are you going to practice these skills, communication skills, than with your best friends in life? To the person who asked this question, I wish you the best in your journey, your exploration of your source of happiness, and I hope you do find it before you find that partner. It will add much more depth to that eventual relationship. Thank you very much for your question.
What are some ways I can practice self-love and self-care while being in a relationship?
This is another great question. Very relatable. Everybody, I think, or most everybody, has this question. How do you still make time for yourself while being in a relationship? The answer for you might vary depending on what stage you are in life. Self-care and self-love for a mother of young children, for example, will look pretty differently than self-care for someone who's single or who doesn't have children. The first question to ask yourself is, what do you consider self-care? Because self-care is going to look like different things to different people. What's important to you? For some people, it might be isolation, downtime, being able to read, take a nap, journal. For others, it might be, I need time to go out with friends, socialize, be with my family. So figure out if you had 24 hours of free time. Your partner goes out of town for 24 hours. You have no obligations, no work obligations. What would you do with your time? Then the question becomes, okay, now that you know what you would do with that time, what is so difficult about carving out hours in order to fit in that self-care? Again, if you're a young mother or older mother, just mother in general, your options may be pretty limited because a lot of times your time isn't your own. Generally, when people ask me, how can I practice self-love or self-care? What they're actually saying is, I know the self-care that I want to do, I just can't take the steps to do it. And the can't part is what I'm curious about. So if you are the type who struggles with setting aside time for self-care, are you the type who tends to be a bit of a people pleaser? The type who is always taking care of others? Do you have trouble asking for what you need? Then it's not really a matter of practicing self-care, it's a matter of being able to ask for it, being able to set aside time for it and express the need for it. Finish this sentence. If I practice self-care the way I want to, what will happen? Based on this answer, you will find what drives you in your relationships, not just your romantic relationship, but relationship with family, with friends, with your children. People who struggle with setting aside enough time for self-care are a lot of times people who have trouble drawing boundaries, who go through life with that no pain, no gain attitude. And a lot of times underneath it, if you go a little bit deeper, not everyone, but in some cases, people don't want to take care of themselves. If you were to think deeply about what it means to take care of yourself, what would that mean? Well, it might mean that you'd have to take care of your emotions. It might mean you have to sit with yourself and acknowledge the pain and the sadness from your childhood. Sit down and nurture yourself when you're feeling angry or frustrated or resentful. To spend enough time with yourself, to care enough about yourself, to want to know where that comes from, how to heal it, how to deal with it, rather than just avoid it and focus on other people's problems so that you can avoid your own problems. Perhaps self-care means taking care of the body, and you've lived a life where you don't like being in your body. where there were unconscionable, traumatic things that happened to your body. And being in your body, taking care of your body is just not something that really is a priority to you. Because what happens if you start to actually sit with your emotions? What will it lead to? It might lead to a lot of pain that you just don't want to deal with, don't want to look at. So you can see that when you start to slow the conversation down and really sit with what it means to practice self-care, what it means to care for you and care for yourself, it goes beyond being able to just draw a bubble bath. There's a lot more potentially lurking beneath this question. And to the person who asked this question, thank you very much for contributing, and I wish you the best in your self-care routine, and I hope you find a way to nurture yourself.
Hi, Kim. Thanks so much for offering this option for us to call you. I'm really excited about this podcast. I just had a really quick question. What would you say to someone who is struggling with constantly comparing themselves to other people? I struggle with this, and in talking with my friends, I noticed that this is a constant theme in a lot of my friends' lives as well. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Thank you so much.
I really love this question because it is a question that I think everyone in our society, or everyone who's ever had an Instagram account, asks. You can't help but be constantly exposed to other people's IG pages and TikTok feeds without comparing yourself. So we're all definitely going to compare ourselves at some point. The question is, how do we navigate that in a reasonable way? For today, let's just look at a couple different types of comparisons. The first comparison is the comparing we do on social media. This is just the worst. Social media is just the bane of everyone's existence. And I realize I say that as I have a fairly good following on Instagram, but let's be real. Social media has created this society where we are frequently poked or triggered or taunted with other people's success, other people's happiness, their joy. And here we are sitting on the couch eating Doritos. But let's actually look at what happens when we compare ourselves to people on social media. For people who post about their personal lives, you choose just the most pristine, perfect point in your life to share. That in and of itself is not bad. However, it fuels this idea that we can only present these edited versions of ourselves. And whenever you present an edited version of yourself in real life, with your relationships, friendships, partnerships, romantic relationships, if you start to do that in your personal life, you are going to end up blocking the ability to receive love. Why? Because if you're only presenting this edited version of yourself, then when someone says they love you, internally you're going to think, well, that's great that you love me and all, but if you only knew that I actually don't look good at this angle and I use Facetune to shave 10 pounds off of that profile pic, and I actually borrowed that outfit from a friend on my Instagram page, if you only knew all of this and that I'm just kind of depressed and anxious 24/7, then you wouldn't really love me. So let's look at what actually happens when we compare ourselves to, let's say, someone on social media. You're essentially taking one small, tiny representation of that person's life, assuming that is their whole identity, that they're a complete person based on this tiny aspect of perfection that they presented for you. There's a word for this, and it's called objectification. You're choosing and focusing one small part of a person's life and objectifying them for it. It's not real, it's not complete, and there's no depth to it. And when you get caught in comparing yourself to people and their social media pages, you're basically getting caught up in a fantasy world. Now, everyone can say, yeah, I know, but I still do it. Well, you don't have to do it. You can start catching your thoughts. Again, getting back to cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT, noticing your thoughts and your beliefs, doing a pattern interrupt with your thoughts so that you just don't automatically walk around in a trance like a zombie, following everything that is dangled in front of you. You can actually interrupt your thoughts, reframe your thoughts, say your thoughts out loud to hear how ridiculous they sound, to hear the irrational logic behind them. Because when you say out loud, yes, my friend went on this perfect romantic date night, her life is so perfect, but I know that's not actually a real representation of her whole life, and I'm sure there's a lot of actual stress in her life, and that her life isn't perfect like that date night 24/7. When you say that out loud, it really calls out the ridiculousness of why we get so envious over social media posts. Now, when it comes to comparing yourself to friends and people in real life, and there are people who are perhaps doing a little bit better than you, maybe a little further along in their career, or maybe they found a husband or a wife or a partner, and you find yourself wanting that. Let that be a positive motivation to you. Comparisons don't always have to be automatically negative. Comparisons can be a great motivator. It's like, oh, that person over there, they just finished their master's degree. Oh, they're moving along and having a great career. They just got that promotion. I want to be like that person. I want to have those goals. I want to create goals. I'm going to sign up for a master's degree. In that way, comparison is great. We will never be able to stop comparing ourselves to others. That is a given. But what we can do is, what do we do with those comparisons? Do we let it bring us down? Do we let it create a lot of envy and create this desire in wanting to take the other person down? Or do we see comparisons and let it be a motivator? Find good people to compare yourself to and strive to be like them. Let them inspire you. Let them lead you. Let them mentor you. Share their success. Learn from them. It doesn't have to be this feeding ground where you take down your competition in a dark alley. Be part of a community. Be part of positive collaboration with others. And let others' success and others who you feel are ahead of you, let them pull you up and inspire you. So if you're struggling with constantly comparing yourselves to other people, then start to get a sense of self for your identity, what your goals are, where you want to go, who you want to be, and find people to model that in your life. Find mentors, good friends. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Find someone who's done it well and talk to them, learn from them. Many times people will approach me and ask me, either in direct messaging or just in real life, ask me about my career path. Ask me about my education or my approach to coaching, relationships, conflict resolution. And when they approach me with a respectful mood versus envy and bitterness, I have no problem sharing everything I can with them to help them along the way for where they are. Comparing yourself to others is not inherently automatically a negative thing. You can make it a negative thing, but find a way to make it a positive thing. Thank you very much for such a great question. Thank you for listening to another episode of Engineering Love. If you'd like to check out more about the show, you can go to the website, engineeringlovepodcast.com. And if you like the show, like the episode, please subscribe, follow, and share with your friends. I'd really appreciate it. And I'd love to hear your feedback. Or if you want to submit a question for a future episode, you can click on the link in the bio or go to any of my social media pages. On Instagram, it's KP_counseling. And today we're going to end with a quote by Stephen Covey, who said, "Self-esteem is the foundation of all the decisions and choices you will make in your life." I could not agree with this more. Thank you, and I'll talk to you again next week.